And we did this by looking back at a few previous weeks to help us understand what exactly that might look like to practice loving our neighbor. And so we reflected on Jesus telling us that we need to pay attention to the Spirit in our midst, pay attention in a new way. And Paul telling us that in Christ we are free to love. And then Jesus sending out his followers to be vulnerable, carrying only an open heart. So through attention, through freedom, and vulnerability, we practice loving our neighbor. But we also reflected on what gets in the way of loving our neighbor. Those times when we know we're supposed to, but it's just really hard. And often what gets in the way are the shoulds that we're thinking about. The situation should be different. They should be different. They should have listened to me. I should have gotten my way. I should be different. When we're caught up in thinking about the way that things should be, it's hard to pay attention to the Spirit in our midst. We're too distracted. And we're clearly not free because we're trapped by what we think should be happening. And we're definitely not being vulnerable because we're most likely being defensive that things are not going according to how we think they should be. So, how we think things should be is often about control. Controlling another, controlling the situation. Yet love is about acceptance. And so that difference between how we think things should be and accepting how things are really, that's the gap that often prevents us from actually loving our neighbor. And today's story offers us a very juicy example to sink our teeth into as we continue to wrestle with what does it look like to love our neighbor. Martha and Mary have welcomed Jesus into their home. And at this point in the story, Martha is very busy. She is doing all of the things a good host should do. She's also very agitated because she thinks Mary should also be doing what a good host should do. So she then thinks Jesus should tell Mary what Mary should be doing based on what I think a good host should be doing. So clearly Martha is caught up in this world of what she thinks should be happening. And in that space, she tries to control Mary. She tries to control Jesus. She's trying to control this situation. But of course, what does Jesus tell her? When he has to call her name, Martha, Martha, it reminds me of those times when I'm trying to get someone's attention and they're very clearly distracted. So I imagine it was probably more something like, Martha, Martha. She's so caught up in that to-do list. So Jesus gets her attention and he tells her, Mary is welcoming me. Mary is the one who is showing attention to the Spirit in her midst. She's literally paying attention to Christ among her. Mary is free. She's not trapped by all of those shoulds that are controlling Martha. And Mary's vulnerable. She probably knew that this would draw Martha's ire. But she shows up with an open heart to their guest. So we see Mary practicing loving the neighbor. And Martha is so caught up in the way that things should be that she can't pay attention. She's not free to be present. And she's definitely being way more defensive than she is vulnerable. So there's another layer that gets added with this story that I really appreciate. And that's that we can reflect on the difference between service and hospitality. Now, some of you may remember I worked as hospitality manager in the craft beer industry for a number of years before ministry. And we would talk a lot about the difference between service and hospitality. Service is what you do. Taking someone's order, getting the right order to the right person, napkins are folded, tablecloths are cleaned. That's the service aspect. Hospitality is about relationship. In fact, my favorite hospitality teacher, Will Guidara, defines it as the persistent, creative pursuit of relationship. That's hospitality. And ideally, service supports hospitality. We do all these things to make it easier to connect and to be in relationship. Because service without hospitality is just a transactional consumer experience. And so Martha, getting caught up in her to-do list of shoulds, what should a good host be doing, is very focused on the service aspect. But even if she checks every single box of what a good host should do, it is still Mary who is offering hospitality and creating a hospitable space. Because Mary is the one who is pursuing relationship. For Martha, it could be any guest, it could be anyone, it wouldn't matter, she's going to do the same thing. That's more transactional. It's very service-oriented. And now the service part, as I said, is very, very important. We definitely need the silverware polished. We absolutely need clean plates and tablecloths. We need to have the coffee made. But the difference is that getting in the way of being in relationship. Now, I don't think Martha's alone here. I imagine that all of us at some point, I can definitely speak for myself, have gotten so caught up in what needs to be done that I would rather focus on that than the people that I could be talking to. Sometimes I use what I need to do as a means of an escape. Oh, I'm the only one who can check on this cake. But hopefully, service is in support of being in relationship. But we know that's not always the case. And especially in our multitask-oriented, productivity-driven culture, what we do is often how we find our sense of worth and sufficiency. And I imagine that for Martha, that was much the same. That she needed to feel that by doing these things, she would accomplish being a good host. And by accomplishing being a good host, well, what status that gives. So, even though, like I say, we have a productivity-driven culture today, if Martha was still experiencing this, clearly this is something that has plagued us for longer than our modern era. This speaks more to our human condition. Now, in Buddhism, the first noble truth is that to live is dukkha. And dukkha is a Sanskrit word that's often translated as suffering. But I think a more nuanced, maybe a better translation is insufficient. So to live is to feel insufficient. And I feel like that's exactly what we're witnessing in Martha. This sense of, if I don't do these things, where is my worth? How will people notice me? How will people know that I'm good? How will I receive praise? How will I receive my worthiness as a beloved person? These plagues of insufficiency can haunt us in all sorts of ways. But if we turn to pacifying that with what we do, like Jesus says, we're still going to miss out. Because what we do will not be loving our neighbor. It will not be creating a better world and relationship with others. It's just following a list. So for Martha, I really wonder, what did that feel like for her? And if you've been in a similar situation where you've really been relying on the things that you do to give you a sense of accomplishment, maybe you can relate. What does that feel like when you're just trying to get things done, but you know you're really only doing them so you'll be noticed, so you'll feel loved, as opposed to when we spend that time pursuing relationship and connection? What does that feel like? When we connect with another person, when we're present to them and they're present to us. Most people, when they reflect on the things that have been most meaningful in their lives, rarely reflect on the accolades that they've received. They often reflect on the people they have loved. But this is a very difficult thing to walk through and to navigate. So I really encourage you, pay attention. When you notice yourself getting caught up in that to-do list, when you notice yourself getting caught up in how things should be, ask yourself why. Why is this what is mattering the most right now? And absolutely, that service aspect is very important. But what is it serving? And if it's not serving hospitality, then maybe reflect a little bit more on what could be a better thing to do. It's a wonderful story. Martha and Mary invite us to reflect on this human condition, the ways that we love our neighbor and show up to one another. And I'll leave you with just one more little phrase that a spiritual teacher of mine offered that has really stuck with me. He said, attention is the first gift of love. And that's phenomenal. Think about the first time that you paid attention to the person who would become your spouse. The first time you paid attention to knowing that you might have a child. These are incredible sparks that change the world. With our attention, being free to be present and to love, and by showing up with only an open heart, we really will transform the world.